This is Alberta Zacour, and she is our narrator. And my name is Connie Rufner, and I am the interviewer. So, you've been telling me a lot of wonderful stories about when you were young and showing me the pictures. So I'm actually just going to ask you to tell them again. So tell me the one about, wow, I'm not even sure where to begin. So when were you born?
When was I born?
When were you born?
I was born in August of 1935.
Okay. All right, so you were very young during the Depression, so do you
Yes.
have memories of that?
I don't exactly have memories of the Depression, but I think I was more on the backside of the Depression. And as I look back, I don't get my personal feeling is not along the lines of distress and needy. I never had those feelings. I always feel that we were all in the same boat. There was not a lot of distinction between the haves and the have-nots because most of us had not. But I was so young, I didn't know.
So where did you grow up at?
Oh my, that's a good question. Almost hard to answer. I was born in Katanning, so I'm a transplant in Ford City. And my dad didn't work for probably about the first 5 years of their marriage. They got married in 1930. And my mother was a school teacher. And at the time, married ladies weren't allowed to teach. So it was kept a secret that they were married. And then, lo and behold, I came upon the scene. So at that point, my mother didn't have a job. My dad didn't have a job. But he became employed with the highway department in Armstrong County. And during this time, he helped to build the scenic route to Crooked Creek, the back road. They blasted, and then he would run the shovel to remove all the broken rocks and what have you. And from that experience, he told me that there are copperhead snakes in Armstrong County because he came across some out there doing this kind of work. And from there, he learned how to run a big machinery, coal stripping and what have you. But before coal stripping came along, he also went up to Clarion County and helped to build the road from Clarion up to Cook's Forest, doing very much what he did on his way out to Crooked Creek. And then that job kind of folded up. And I don't remember exactly what brought us to Sligo, but we were in rented rooms in Brookfield when he was working on this road to Clarion, to Crooked Creek. And from there we went into furnished rooms in Sligo. And something kind of interesting in Sligo at the end of our street was a CC camp. And that was put into formation under President Roosevelt.
Tell us what the name, the CC, what that's good for.
Gosh, I wish I could remember. Something about
Conservation?
Conservation, yes. And it seems to me, if I remember correctly, these boys that were at this camp had a lot to do with Cook's Forest, the formation and making Cook's Forest what it is today. But from there, then we moved to Reimersburg, and we always lived where my dad worked. We didn't have a car, and you just didn't do that. We lived in furnished rooms. So my dad got a job at Reimersburg Coal Company. Now there's a tie between Reimersburg Coal Company and Ford City, because Mr. Crane, that owned Elger Pottery, also owned the Reimersburg Coal Company.
Uh-huh.
And the Reimersburg Coal Company furnished the coal to run Elger Pottery. And during the war, they were transferring over to gas. They were going to run the pottery on gas. So we left Reimersburg and moved to West Virginia, where my dad got a job, again, coal stripping. And let's see what's down there. He stripped coal on the property where that entertainment center is near Burgettstown.
Uh-huh.
He cleared all that, and of coal. That was coal stripping. And that was one of the first places that the coal stripping job was refurbished with pine trees. There was a law passed that you had to refurbish the ground, and that took place on that property. And then we came back to Katanning, and my mother was teaching by that. So anyhow, that's a little bit of my background.
So they changed it so that married women could teach after that? Is that
Yes,
what happened?
because during the war, they were going off to fight the war, and they needed teachers. They didn't care whether you were married or not at that time. So she went back into teaching.
So and then after that is when your family came back here?
Yes. Yeah.
And they came back to Katanning?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And my mother taught kindergarten then, from 1947 until she retired in 1970.
So your mom was Mrs. McCurdy, and she went back to teaching kindergarten.
Well, she went back to teaching when we were in West Virginia.
And then she
They
came back
needed
here.
and then when we moved back to Katanning, she was from Katanning. R.D. lived on a farm a long time. But, yeah.
Now, how old were you when you came back?
I was going into 7th grade. So I spent all of my junior and high school years here in Katanning. Yeah.
So, you said that married women were allowed to go back to teaching because they needed the teachers because of the war. So, do you remember anything else about the war? Do you?
Oh, well, yes. I told you about the
butter. Tell me
butter.
about
That's
the butter. Yeah.
That's part of the war story.
That was rationing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We lived in West Virginia at Follansbee, and our big A&P for shopping was in Steubenville. So that's where we went to shop, and it was almost a delightful experience for me because the store itself wasn't air conditioned, but it had a dairy room that was always air conditioned. So in the summer, I look forward to going for groceries to get to go into the dairy room where it was much cooler. But anyhow, they had plastic bags. Our butter was rationed because the good butter went overseas to take care of the troops. And Mother always got a little bag. It might be a little bit bigger in size than this little speaker, but anyhow, it was white. It often made me think of lard. But in the corner was a little pill, and it was red, colored red. And my job coming home from shopping was to make our butter yellow. So I would pinch this little pill, and the red would fly out in all directions. It was kind of interesting to pinch the pill, but then I would knead it until we got home. That was our butter, and you didn't worry about eating lard because it looked like butter
yellow.
by the time we got home. And we always had a varied menu during the war. It wasn't every day; it was varied, but we had very nice neighbors, and we would trade leftovers so that we would have a varied menu. maybe what they sent over wasn't a full meal, but it became an interesting meal. And then when Mother would send hers over there, they would have an interesting meal. So it was interesting. And then they were very kind to us, because when we moved from Reimersburg down here, we didn't have friends beyond the group that came from Reimersburg. It was a work group that went down there, and they were our friends. Well, we didn't have a telephone, didn't really need one, but on occasion, maybe my dad's parents were still up here in Armstrong County, and we would need to get a message. And our kind neighbors that sent over their leftovers and ate ours, they would come out on the porch, and if we had gotten a phone call, they called Bowman's, and they would come out with a whistle and blow the whistle, and we knew to go answer the whistle, be it a phone call or some other emergency, that they wanted us to come over or something. That was the way we conversed with the neighbors. Interesting, huh?
That's very.
Yeah.
That's very.
Who would have thought? We were very resourceful.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, just in this little bit of a story about trading the leftovers, so you had different meals and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then another thing that kind of paralleled the war was peanut butter. It was a fairly new product.
Oh, really?
And you would eat it, and it would stick to the roof of your mouth. Oh, sometimes I couldn't get it loosened with my tongue. I'd have to reach in. Mom got on to putting a little bit of mayonnaise in it and stir it up, make it spreadable. Because, if it wasn't spreadable, it would tear your bread all apart, to make a sandwich.
Peanut butter being like that.
Yeah.
We would make sandwiches with mayonnaise and peanut butter. Mayonnaise first and then peanut butter.
Well, Mom would put
She
the
would
mayonnaise
put it in.
so that you could spread it.
Right.
Because it would just tear the bread all up, you'd have clumps and bumps.
I had forgotten all about that.
Yeah.
Because peanut butter doesn't do that anymore.
Oh, no. Nobody today would have time to dig it out of the roof of their mouth. Yeah.
Well, now, when did you first have peanut butter then? Do you remember?
Not really. It must have been very young, because I remember trying to really work at it to get it out of the roof of my mouth. No, but something that I remember, Mother always belonged to a card club, and Jell-O was first on the scene. And oh my, the experimenting with that Jell-O was an adventure. Putting different things in it, and did it work? Would it gel up with this in or that in? And then they would trade recipes at the card clubs. It was interesting. Yeah.
So, do you remember what your favorite one was?
No, I just loved it all. It was always cold. And refreshing. And I think probably the earliest fruit would have been banana. That would have been experimented with. Yeah.
That's great, because when I was growing up in the 50s, it was like Jell-O was a main thing. Every church supper and every.
Oh, yes. Did you ever have it served on a lettuce leaf?
Yes.
Yes, and then without the lettuce, it became the dessert.
Right. Yeah.
And putting it on with a graham cracker crust. You put Jell-O on with that and make like a little sandwich, and then cut it and have a dessert. That would be a dessert as opposed to a salad.
That was resourceful too.
Oh yes. And it was an adventure putting cabbage in coleslaw and with the Jell-O.
Oh.
You haven't done that? Oh, that would
good.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So a coleslaw or just cabbage?
No, coleslaw.
Coleslaw.
Well, you wouldn't put the dressing on it.
Okay.
It would just
But
be
the
the
shredded-
cabbage, or
uh-huh.
shredded cabbage, what did she put in? Carrots.
Uh-huh.
There was something else that she would put in. Oh, on occasion she would put crushed pineapple in. Drain your pineapple and put it in with the cabbage, the dry cabbage.
Uh-huh.
And take it from there. You could put on almost anything. So that Jello was a very, it was almost the heart of a lot of things.
Uh-huh.
You know, just sorts, salads, refreshing. It was always refreshing.
Uh-huh. You know, you're the first person who kind of talked about food from that time.
Oh.
You know, recipes, and the
Yeah.
peanut butter was new and the gel was
my.
new.
Oh, yes. Well, there was a lot of experimentation then,
Uh-huh.
because we were coming out of the, what would they say, the Edwardian age.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And so there were a lot of new foods that hadn't.
Oh, yes. Well, and then during the wars, you couldn't get just everything.
Right.
So
right.
you would try this and try that, and experiment. Now, if you know my mother, you might appreciate this. When we came back from West Virginia, she went back to college because she was teaching on a certificate.
Uh-huh.
She had not graduated.
Uh-huh.
It was a teacher's certificate, and she wanted to get her diploma.
Uh-huh.
And Pennsylvania needed to have, I guess, water safety,
Uh-huh.
that she had to go and get a swimming suit because she was going to Indiana
Uh-huh.
and they had an indoor pool,
Uh-huh.
and she was going to have to learn to swim.
Uh-huh.
So she bought a wool bathing suit at the arcade. I don't know if you remember
I
the
remember
arcade.
the arcade, yeah.
Arcade, but and I still have it.
Do you really?
Yes, it's home in a cedar chest, but it doesn't look anything like today's bathing suits.
Was it one of those ones with the long skirts?
No, it didn't have long legs, I will say that.
Uh-huh.
It was, I guess you would call it a tank style.
Uh-huh.
But
Uh-huh.
it was red wool. And I think, oh my, how would she have swum?
In that?
Have you ever touched wool when it's wet?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, she doesn't know.
You don't really want to, actually.
No. I mean, it is itchy. It sends you up the walls.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I just can't imagine how she ever struggled with that thing. But, yes.
Wow. Well, that was before they made them out of nylon?
Mm-hmm. Well, they might have been making them out of not. Well, yeah, it would have been because the nylon would have gone for parachutes.
Right, yeah.
You know, up until 47,
Uh-huh.
everything was concentrated on the war and defense. And
So there was rationing all the way up to 47. So even after the war, there still was?
I wouldn't say there probably certain material wouldn't have been available
Uh-huh.
until after the war, and
Uh-huh.
until they got it in production, she would have.
So it took a while.
Yes, till the nylon would have showed up. So, but I think of that wet bathing suit.
Oh, my.
It's almost grim.
Yeah, really. Well, and it's a wonder that, I mean, if people were wearing wool bathing suits, I never thought about how uncomfortable that would be. It's a wonder they took to swimming at all.
Well, I can't swim, so it didn't encourage me.
So you said that your mom, one of the pictures you have is your mom's card club.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember that being very common, card clubs. So your mom had a card club.
Oh yes, wherever we lived, there was friends, you know, that made card club. Oh yes.
What'd they play?
Well, Mother liked to play 500,
Uh-huh.
but canasta was coming on the scene in the late 40s. So I don't know if they experimented, you know, just exactly what they played, but when she went to card club, I would be home by myself. And I would turn every light in the house on and turn the radio on and listen to Mr. District Attorney and Inner Sanctum, and I'd be hiding behind the couch, scared to death, but I just loved listening to these radio shows, stories they would be, radio stories. So I'm just full of stories.
Yeah, really. So you said you had a radio and it was just inside the door.
Yes, it would sat right inside the door when we lived in Reimersburg. And I think the reason we got that was because there was always air raids. And that would be your communication about the air raids, when it was over and when it started, and those things. So we lived in Reimersburg then and came down to Katanning and bought our it was a floor heights radio. And the minute that we got home with it, Mom got black cloth and thumbtacked it all around so that the enemy planes wouldn't see the lights from the radio bulbs. There would be tubes in the radio, and she was just certain that the enemy planes flying overhead might see these little lights down there and know there was civilization.
So were there actually enemy planes actually flying over this area?
No.
But people thought they might.
Oh yes, at any given moment. Oh yes, it was always constant.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, went right out of my head. Did you ever think we might lose the war? Did people think that might happen?
No, everybody was, not that I'm aware of anyway, everybody was very busy at doing their thing and, always contributing. Tires were another thing that was rationed, so that you didn't really just run around in your vehicles, you stayed home. If you went, it was on purpose. And we had friends that always took us when we went shopping. We were always with them, or they took us with them, or so you didn't waste anything. So I lived through it.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. See, but I was a kid, and it didn't. I wasn't frightened. I wasn't aware. I didn't know enough to be frightened, I guess. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and do you know what your parents were feeling? Do you know, were they afraid or?
No. Now my dad went down, let's see, they bombed Pearl Harbor on a Sunday. And my dad went down from Reimersburg to Pittsburgh on Monday. And he wasn't accepted. And I never knew exactly why, so I had a conversation with him before he died, and here it was because he was working digging coal, and that was necessary to the war effort. So I don't know the term, but he wasn't accepted because of his job. He was never proud of it because he had a brother that was in both world wars.
Oh, really?
Yes. And he was never proud of it, but it was what it was.
Yeah. Sure, and they needed him where he was.
Yeah. Well, now I didn't tell the story about Reimersburg, how they got the coal down to Ford City.
Yeah.
Well, I'll interject that then. The coal was mined up in Reimersburg, and it was trucked to East Brady and put on a barge and came down the river to Elger, and that's where they got their energy from the coal.
And you were showing me the equipment for the strip mining.
Yes. Well, it went when the Reimersburg Coal Company closed down because Elger went into the gas. They moved all the Rammersburg coal equipment on big old tractor trailers and went down over the mountains. They went down through West Virginia. I did recently find that out, that was, and I'm sure that would have been a treacherous trip in those days because there was no big highways. And it probably took them maybe a week or 10 days to get down there with all this stuff. But that's how Florida was drained from a swamp area into the state that it is, that they could build on the land. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if what they didn't use that equipment for building the bridges down to Key West. I guess there's keys down and they had to attach bridges to each. And I wouldn't be surprised if they used that equipment. And the last I heard, it was still down there.
Really?
But can you imagine a coal company in Florida? They wouldn't have to dig deep to run into water.
Yeah, really.
There'd be no coal down there, so, yeah.
Well, tell me about your friend, or your mom's friend, who had worked for Bailey, of Barnum and Bailey.
Yes. They also worked for the Rammersburg Coal Company. Now, my dad was a operator, and then each of the pieces of equipment had to have an oiler because that's what kept everything moving. And Roy Cochran had been an oiler for my dad, and as it turned out, his wife's name was Bertha. She was in Edwards from Wick City. And Roy Cochran's family was from up around Templeton and Woodnoon and that area. And before they hooked up with the coal company, they worked as a couple for the circus, Barnum's. And they were in Florida. And as it turned out, during the early 40s, I was never allowed to go with my mother and dad on trips because polio was so prevalent. So Bertha and Roy didn't have any children, and they would take care of me while Mom and Dad would have little jaunts. And so I was always entertained by their circus stories because they had worked for the circus people. And Bertha had been like in charge of their house, and Roy during this time was their chauffeur. And they would entertain royalty from Europe when they came to the United States. They would have the royalty and leaders of the world come and visit, and of course they would have a circus performance. But during that time, then Roy would come into the house and he would be the butler. So these were stories they would tell me while Mom and Dad were out on their little jaunts. Yeah.
And you said they knew the Munchkins.
Oh yes, they knew all the monsters in The Wizard of Oz. They knew them by first name because they were circus. They were part of the circus.
Okay, and what about when the circus train came through Templeton?
Oh yes, well because Roy's family was from up there, they started using the trains to move the circus from one entertainment to another. And when they would pass through Templeton, they always unloaded the train and had a circus. They have a circus entertainment up there because Roy's family was from up there, and they would all come to see Roy, and of course they entertained Templeton.
That's a great story. Did people come from all around to see it?
I wouldn't be surprised if they knew that it was coming. You know, why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, Templeton was a very important area to Armstrong County, building Armstrong County.
Really?
Oh yes. They were along the river, and then the railroad came through. And they also had deep mining up there. And then they had brick factories. You know, so it was, and they had a big hotel along the railroad tracks.
Really?
And well, you have to remember that even before the Depression, there were men that didn't have farms. And hobos, have you heard of hobos? They were even before the Depression. They would ride the train to different places and pick up jobs wherever they could. So.
Do you remember hobos from when you were a kid?
I can't say I remember seeing any. I've heard stories, about them. It was always a little cluster. They kind of gathered together in certain places. They would hop off the train and keep each other warm, and they ate out of cans. I guess beans were very popular. I don't know.
So Templeton was then much bigger than it is today.
I don't know if it was much bigger, but Kataning's bigger.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if Ford City, is bigger. So it's really hard to say. But I know it was a very important area to Armstrong County.
Things changed. Well, you've seen a lot of things change since you were young.
Oh, yeah. Now, they're up on top of the Ford City Hill, where all those grand houses are. That was an airstrip. I can remember going up there. I must have been 3 or 4, maybe. And airplanes were fascinating, just fascinating. So one Sunday afternoon, we went up and watched the airplanes. There might have been 2 or 3. I'm sure there weren't many more. But that was quite entertaining. Nothing like today's airplanes.
Yeah, but no.
Barnstormers, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I don't know what else to ask. This has been wonderful. You've told us a lot about daily life and social things and things that nobody else has talked about yet. So I really appreciate that. Yes.
Well, now one of the pictures, which I did mention to you about a spring. It was on the way to Zelienople. Why we were going to Zelienople this day, I don't know. We didn't have family or anything, probably just out for a ride. But there was a nice spring along the road to Zelienople, and we always had a little folding cup. It was like a telescope, and it would go up and down, and it maybe was about that high with a lid on it, and then it would expand, and probably went that high. And you would get to spring water. Oh, it was so refreshing. And another thing that they would have on a Sunday afternoon, we would stop at a service station, and if I had been good and not bothered the driver, we would get maybe a popsicle, fudge bar, ice cream bar. And we always hung around the service station. We never left, because on your stick, when you were done, it might say free.
Oh.
And if you were lucky enough to get a free on your stick, it meant you got a free ice cream bar.
Oh, wow.
So we never, we did our eating ice cream at where we stopped and bought it, because it was just a chance you might get a free one. And if you got a free one, oh my, we all shared it.
So when you went on a drive, did you take a picnic with you?
I really can't remember. We did do a lot of picnicking, but I just can't remember exactly to pinpoint it that way. But
so going on a picnic was a regular way to be entertained?
Well, it was more or less like a family reunion. There would be more than just one car. But my dad had a pretty big family, and we would always get together, and you would just start out and find a nice area where you could spread your blanket, and there'd be a thermos, lemonade, sandwiches.
So you didn't necessarily go to the parks. You just.
Oh, no, there wasn't any parks.
So this is the time when Cook's Forest and Crooked Creek were being built.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
So did you stop at a field, or did you stop in the woods? Or?
Well, it would be along the road, an open area, tall grass, and they, not terribly long ago, they started talking about deer tick. Well, I never really paid much attention, but the more I thought of it, I can remember when we would stop along the road, like we're talking about the picnics now, and the grass would be a little high. I can remember seeing my dad take his cigarette and kind of singe the hair on his arm, but I'm feeling that those were deer ticks.
And he was burning
He
them
would
up.
have been, yeah. And it never occurred to me. Oh well, I was a little girl then to ask about that. But when they started talking deer ticks, then I would think about that.
That was before Lyme disease was so widespread.
Oh, never heard of Lyme disease.
Yeah.
You just got rid of those things, those nasty little critters.
Now you said they wouldn't let you go with them because polio was so widespread. Did you know anybody who got polio?
No. That was a dread. They would put you in an iron lung, and it was a huge contraption, big around, and you were encased, and you would live your life in that, and you couldn't really look around because your head was kind of also in this contraption. But when they did want to talk to somebody in an iron lung, they would use a mirror. You know, they could see you. Nasty, it was nasty.
Yeah. Do you remember when the war ended?
I can't say I do, quite honestly. We were kind of like out of town, and I suspected if there was any celebrations, they would have been in town. So I really can't really remember.
Do you remember when President Roosevelt died?
Oh, yes. We lived in West Virginia, and my mother was up on a ladder. I was helping her. We were cleaning wallpaper. And we cleaned wallpaper with, like, what do they have? It was like gummy stuff. And you would work it and get all the dirt down inside, and then you could use it again on to clean a space. And something, I looked over and Mother gasped and grabbed hold of the ladder, and I thought she was going to fall off. She was kind of pale, and that's what it was. He had died. Oh, it was terrible. It was sad. Sad.
Well, he must have been president for most of the time that you were young. I mean, he must have been the only president that you knew.
Yes. Up until, when did he die? 46, I guess it was. And then President Truman came into office. And no one really gave him enough credit. I think he was so overshadowed by President Roosevelt. But President Roosevelt was a big man. I don't mean physically, I mean the aura of the man was so big. But Mrs. Roosevelt wasn't very popular.
Oh, wasn't she?
No, the men didn't like her because she wouldn't put up with what they were, handing out for women. No, she didn't go along with that. So, did I talk about my mother's icing story?
Oh, tell me the icing story.
Well, the people that we were with going to Zelienople, they were a couple that before my mother and dad were married, Mother taught at a one-room schoolhouse out near Elderton along 422. The school is still there today, but you almost have to look for it because it's so grown up. But anyhow, she boarded with these people, and my mother, being a farm girl, she would take the icing off the cake and treat the icing like candy. It would be the last thing from the meal, the highlight of her meal anyway. Mm-hmm. Well, the first night she was boarding with Miles and Grace Root, Grace made a cake for dessert, and right away Mom took the icing off the cake and laid it aside of the dish, and she was enjoying her cake and was ready for the icing, and looked down and the icing was gone. Here Miles had reached over and took her icing, and that was the last time she ever separated her icing from the cake. We laughed about that for years and years. He stole her icing. But they were the ones that bought me my little tea set.
Show us the tea set.
And the little tea set, during the war, it was patriotic to get rid of everything in your house that was from Japan. And I don't know if you can see it or not, but this little box held my tea set, and on the box it said Japan, which meant I should get rid of my tea set. It broke my heart. I love my tea set. So I hid it. It was under my bed for a couple of years. But it was safe because I still have it today. And I still love my tea set, and it was Grace and Miles that got me my tea set. I don't know if you can get it or not, but
see, do you want me to hold it closer?
I got it.
Okay, she's got it. That's wonderful.
And on the bottom it says made in Japan. Yeah. So I hid my tea set, and I got it to this day.
Did your mom know that you hid it?
She probably found out. If she didn't know, she probably was cleaning and found it before I ever knew she had found it. But anyhow.
And she very kindly pretended she didn't know.
Oh, probably,
Yeah.
yes. So I think that's about my stories.
Well, this has been a privilege. It's become wonderful stories to tell. I really appreciate that you talked to us.
Well, this has been a thrill for me.
Oh, good.
Just to share with you.
Good.
Because it means so much to me. I didn't have any brothers or sisters. So it's just a pleasure for me.
Oh, thank you.